Natural Habitat Adventures is pleased to be bringing you this webinar today. We're live from Cape Town, and we're here to talk about Charismatic Coastal Cape Town, presented by Craig Glatar. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about Craig before I turn it over to him. Craig grew up in South Africa, and his younger years were spent outdoors on a daily basis, catching snakes, frogs, and spending as much time as possible in the water. Family holidays were off-road affairs with trips through southern and eastern Africa in the family's trusty old 1978 Land Rover. This naturally led to a career in tourism and travel. Craig's journey has now come full circle, and he applies his business acumen and love of conservation to full use with wilderness safaris. And we're delighted to have him with us this evening. As I said, it's evening in Cape Town, still daytime for us, but nonetheless, we're in for a great presentation by Craig. So over to you, Craig.
Thank you very much, guys, and thank you everyone for joining the presentation this evening. So what we're going to be having a look at in Charismatic Coastal Cape Town is Cape Town in quite a different light. Many of us know Cape Town extremely well for the city and destination and attraction that it is, but there's a secret side to Cape Town. And I'm a fanatical guide from the bush, as most of you know. And so what we're going to look at tonight is the secret side to the fauna and flora of Cape Town, because underneath all the city lights and the glitz and the glam that have made Cape Town so famous is some really, really incredible biodiversity that many people don't consider. Just quickly, Cape Town as a city is obviously famous for a number of different reasons and has become a primary destination in Africa for many reasons. I mean, the V&A waterfront, such as in this shot here, has actually overtaken the pyramids as the #1 destination traveled to on the African continent. So Cape Town acts as a draw card for extensive journeys through Africa. I mean, Natural Habitat have Cape Town as an extension program to many of their other programs that focus on safaris further in South Africa and Botswana and Namibia and other parts of Africa. So the city itself has an attraction on its own, from obviously the waterfront to the winelands, over 252 wine farms that are an hour's drive from the city. But in between all of these wine farms and in between all of this action is some incredible biodiversity. And we'll get to that in a minute. Obviously, Cape Town's famous for its incredible beaches. This is a shot of Camps Bay, close to the city center. The city of Cape Town, you guys might know this already, but it received Telegraph's Travel Award for the best city to visit in 2014. It also received the New York Times top 52 places in the world in 2014 to visit. So it's been picking up a lot of attention as a primary destination. And it's also built a great reputation around fantastic dining and gourmet experiences. This is a shot from a hotel that Natural Habitat include in their extension called the 12 Apostles, a great shot from their restaurant overlooking the ocean there. But we're going to get into the detail inside those oceans shortly. The city and the destination has also built a lot of interesting fame around its beautiful coastline, and it's this kind of coastline with an amazing array of marine biodiversity that meets incredible land biodiversity that we're going to look at in a bit more detail. The destination, again, has built an incredible reputation around outdoor lifestyle, adventure activities. I mean, you name it, in Cape Town, you can do it. It's paragliding, it's abseiling, it's rock climbing, it's mountain biking, anything that one can do at the tip of Africa that one can imagine. And of course, really incredible and interesting wildlife. Some of the more famous wildlife would be something like these African, previously known as jackass penguins, that occur on the beaches along the Cape Peninsula. But they're the well-known side of Cape Town. What we're going to look at is scratch the surface of Cape Town and understand a bit more about the incredible biodiversity that exists in the surface, or under the surface rather. But before we get into that, we've got to have an understanding of where it came from, the history of biodiversity to the Cape. And I'm going to take you guys way back to prehistoric times. Then we're going to look at some of the more recent times when the Dutch settlers arrived in the Cape in the late 17th century. And then we'll go into the current biodiversity that exists in the Cape. Now, if we look at the Cape 5 million years ago, And this is obviously evident from fossil evidence in Cape Town. You'll see that Cape Town was predominantly a very lush and subtropical destination. And there's amazing fossils in an area called the West Coast Fossil Park in Langebaan that tells the story about the biodiversity before mankind's arrival. We're talking about double-tusked elephants and saber-toothed cats and amazing species of hyena. The origins of hyena in Africa are from Cape Town. And things like African bears and special types of rhino that existed in the Cape. And this slowly changed and evolved from 5 million years ago. I got really stuck into my research in this kind of biodiversity and understanding that during the Miocene period, which was 5 million years ago, would you guys believe that there were over 60 species of hyena that originated in this part of the southern parts of Africa? It was still Gondwanaland, it was still one continent in essence. And actually, interestingly enough, the dog species of this world, or the genus of dogs, which are known as canids, they originated on your side of the planet, where you guys are. That's from the North American side. And it was actually the canids that crossed from the New World, the Americas, into the Old World. And the Old World's obviously all those areas on the eastern hemisphere of our planet, so Europe and Asia and Africa. But when the canid species, or genus rather, crossed from the New World into the Old World, they essentially outcompeted hyenas in many of these ecological settings that you're seeing here now. And that actually changed the appearance and the ecology of hyenas, and they evolved into only 4 species we know today that are essentially hunters slash scavengers on the African continent today. But fascinating to see how this evolution already started from 5 million years ago. There were even these crazy types of hippopotamus on the southern tip of what is today the African continent. You guys might know this already, but hippopotamus it's a Greek word. Hippo meaning horse, and potamus is meaning river, so basically a river horse. And there was an incredible variety of hippopotamus on this continent at this time that have evolved into only 2 species that we know today. And many of you probably won't even know this. We actually still have resident and original hippopotamus that were found in the Cape still living in Cape Town, living 15 minutes from the city center. And I'll show you a bit more about that now. But let's bring it a little bit closer as we move through that prehistoric time. And we get to the time of the first Cape Dutch settlers that moved to the Cape. So Cape Town, as most of you will know, it wasn't a Dutch colony as such. It was a halfway stop for the ships that were moving from Europe, stopping at the tip of Africa to load with new vegetables and water supply, and continuing on to the east, to India and the Far East and the Indonesian islands, to ply their trade, their spice and food trade. And this became the trade route, and Cape Town became the halfway stop. And the Dutch settlers stopped in the Cape because there was access to fresh water off what is famously known as Table Mountain today. And they arrived in the late 17th century, 1652, the Dutch settlers arrived, roughly at the same time that Bantu tribes that we know today as Zulu or isiXhosa tribes moved down from East Africa and Southern Africa to the tip of Cape Town. But when they arrived here, there were a number of interesting fauna and flora that were already under pressure, one of them being the bluebuck. And these bluebuck were already under pressure from local tribesmen that had their own sheep and type of goats in this area. And those local tribesmen in this area were known as Khoikhoi, or if you want to pronounce it correctly, it's called Khoikhoi. And they were already putting some species like bluebuck under pressure. And when the Dutch arrived, they found this a really easy antelope to hunt, and they caused the first extinction of the first large African mammal on the African continent. And this bluebuck was related to roan and sable that many of us will have seen and know already today. And at the time, naturalists actually classified the bluebuck as merely a subspecies of roan. But today it's now recognized as a completely separate species. Basically, roan and bluebuck occurred in the same area, in sympatry, it's known. And a sympatric relationship is generally when 2 animals exist in the same geographic area and regularly encounter one another, but they don't necessarily breed. So this was an entirely different species that then became extinct with the arrival of the Dutch settlers. You can, if you if you're really interested, go and see some examples of bluebuck in Vienna and Stockholm and Paris, and there's another place, Leiden, where they still have these displays, as you can see here. But this was the first species to become extinct in the Cape, but it leads us into more interesting stories as we continue. You'll be fascinated to know that the largest and heaviest subspecies of lion in the African continent also occurred in the Cape at the time of the Cape Dutch settlers. And it was known as the Cape black-maned lion. And it was registered as a subspecies because of its seemingly fixed external morphology of lions. For example, it had a huge mane extending between the shoulders, covering the belly, a dark mane. The lion's ears were distinctively black tips to them. And the last one, unfortunately, was killed in the Cape in 1858. And this species, or subspecies rather, was exterminated entirely due to hunting. The Dutch settlers moving into the area and hunting these lion, and resulted in them becoming extinct in this actual area. There's a massive debate that still rages on today whether the Cape black-maned lion is a subspecies of lion or not. Many will argue that there are only two subspecies of lion, Pantheria leopersica, which is the one from Asia, or Pantheria leopardus, the one from Africa. But currently there's definitively 8 subspecies of lion. The Cape black-maned lion extinct, and the Barbary lion from the northern Atlas mountain regions of Africa also extinct. But fascinating to see that these species existed already in the Cape at this time. And would you believe that at this time of the Cape Dutch settlers, elephant herds were rife? There were elephant herds everywhere in the Cape. And the elephants weren't here continually, but they migrated in and out of the Cape to have their young, to calf, and also to search for water. Cape Town's a Mediterranean climate, so we get most of our rain predominantly from May to October. And the elephants know this, and they'd come from the high-lying dry plateaus into the deep Cape Peninsula Valley to source this water. And they would come down the mountains into an area known as Franschhoek. That was how they entered the Cape Peninsula. And Franschhoek today, which means French corn in Afrikaans, is famous all around the world for its fantastic wines and great gourmet experiences. It's known as the gourmet capital of Cape Town, and Natural Habitat visit Franschhoek during their 3-day Cape Town extension. But would you believe that these elephants traveled down the Franschhoek Pass that we still drive down today in the late 1600s, beginning to the 1700s? The last one shot in this valley in 1688. And this valley, when the Dutch settlers moved here, was actually originally called Olifantshoek, which means the elephant corner in Afrikaans or Dutch. So that lends its name to the elephants that arrive in this area. And thanks to these elephants who trod this challenging path down the Franschhoek Mountains into the Franschhoek Valley, we then used that path with ox wagons to enter and exit the Cape Basin, as it's called. And today we've now tarred and put asphalt on that road and used it to drive up and down. And that's all thanks to the elephants that trod that path originally before mankind was on the scene, or at least in this area. So fascinating to see that kind of history in the area. As we slowly move from that, I want to touch on an incredible subspecies in the area that's known as the quagga. Now, if we talk about extinction, and we're going to move from extinction onto more positive topics in a moment, but if we talk about extinction, extinction is as final as it's always been. If a species of animal or plant has disappeared from the earth, whether it's natural or human causes, the loss is completely irreversible. Extinction is extinct. And this animal, called the quagga, was in theory an extinct species that lived in South Africa until the 19th century. And it derived its name from the sound it makes. And it was common in the Cape area up until the last one, which died in 1883 in a zoo. But it was hunted a lot by the Dutch settlers that moved into this area, and it was considered a species of zebra and was therefore defined as extinct. However, the extinct quagga was not necessarily a species, but one of several subspecies of what is now known as the plain zebra in Africa. And they basically diverged from the plain zebra as a subspecies about 120,000 to 200,000 years ago. And this makes a huge difference because the quagga's extinction may not be forever. And I'll explain to you why that's so interesting, because there is a fantastic project taking place, a breeding project taking place in Cape Town. It's less than 5 minutes from the city center on the slopes of Table Mountain, where they're reversing the quagga's extinction. And I say reversing it because it's reclassified as a subspecies of zebra. You can see this is what the quagga looked like originally. This is a specimen from the Natural History Museum in Basel. But basically, present Southern Plains zebras demonstrate some very unique and individual variations and quagga characteristics. So by bringing selected individuals together and concentrating the ones that have characteristics similar to this one seen here, you should be able to breed and emerge within a species that, or a subspecies that is close to the original quagga population that existed here when the Cape Dutch settlers arrived. And how close these rebred quaggas will eventually be to the original quaggas is pretty difficult to determine. These days, they're only able to take what's known as the mitochondrial DNA of the original quagga of these specimens seen here, not the actual nuclear DNA. And it's all thanks to your wonderful University of California, Berkeley, that initiated the study. And now we're actually bringing back a subspecies from supposed extinction. And it brings into massive questions around the taxonomy of species, especially zebra in Cape Town. Here you can see the results of the 3rd generation of zebra that have been bred from plain zebra to showcase these incredible characteristics of what was originally known as the quagga. And originally, those of you who are super interested will know that originally zebras in Africa were classified as Equus bucelli. So that's genus, species, subspecies, Burchell's zebra. But now, because quagga were the first zebra ever discovered on the African continent, they've renamed that entire taxonomy around zebra classification. So Burchell's zebra, which is your ones you'll see in Kruger National Park and those areas, is now classified as Equus quagga bucelli. And the quagga, which we're rebreeding, is classified as Equus quagga. And so this goes on and changes the entire taxonomy. And it's just an incredible story, the only one of its kind, where we're talking about rebreeding an animal from extinction. And that's because of the change in the taxonomy, the naming of the actual species. But let's get back to more details and more positive talk around the current biodiversity in the Cape. The current biodiversity in the Cape was brought about through some massive climate change. So the area of the Cape Peninsula became this incredibly arid area due to this cold current running up along the coastline there called the Benguela Current. And due to this cold, arid climate and lack of water, many species of flora and fauna began to actually decline. And that's where we started to see species disappearing. The short-necked giraffe from about 2 million years ago disappeared from this area. The saber-toothed cats disappeared about 1.8 million years ago from this area. But some plants, with their origins in the central mountainous parts of Africa, what is called an Afro-montane habitat, thrived in this drier climate and began to dominate and diversify in this area of the Cape. And so over the last 5 million years, we saw a massive evolution of the actual flora in this area. And it's this flora that multiplied and multiplied and now became known, what we know today as the Cape Floral Kingdom. Now the Cape Floral Kingdom, why it's so important is because it's one of only 6 floral kingdoms in the entire world. And it's probably the most bio-intense floral kingdom in the world. There's more than 8,500 species in the smallest floral kingdom found only on this Cape Peninsula. And they're known as fynbos. You guys might have heard that term before. And fynbos includes different types of grasses and ericas and proteas. We all know proteas, as you can see in this image here. And the name or the terminology came from a Dutch term meaning fine leaves or fine bush. And it's this fynbos that evolved over 5 million years to dominate this area. And the incredible biodiversity that then grew from this fynbos that dominated this area of the Cape. Now, fynbos is a completely fire-adapted vegetation. Many of you will have heard about the terrible fires that happened in Cape Town at the end of last year and how tragic it was. Yes, it is tragic in terms of human involvement, but it's actually an essential part of fynbos. Fynbos requires regular burning for its persistence. In the absence of this fire, the fynbos is completely replaced by thicket species that take over. So the fynbos essentially thrives on these infertile soils, and the fire is the mechanism that recycles these incredibly precious nutrients from old growth into the soil. And it basically resets the fynbos's successional clock, allowing species to succeed and carry on. And we've now discovered in the Cape that an optimal fire cycle is every 10 to 14 years. And why is that? Because a shorter fire cycle means that species that are slow maturing will be wiped out by these other thicket species. Whereas a faster or a too fast fire cycle will result in species not being able to establish themselves. So it's incredible how fire becomes the conduit for fynbos to thrive and exist in this area. It obviously puts a lot of pressure on more of the actual fauna of the area, not the flora. And I'm going to get stuck into a little bit of this interesting actual fauna that we find in this incredible fynbos flora. And some of it, you can find some really interesting stuff on a Facebook page called Wild Neighbors Urban Wildlife Initiative, all about our wild neighbors in the Cape that live in the city or close to us here in Cape Town. And there's some incredible ones that you wouldn't expect. Would you believe that Cape leopards are absolutely thriving in the Cape? There's incredible work being done studying these leopards in the Cape by a wonderful trust called the Cape Leopard Trust that Wilderness Safari supports. And they're an active predator conservation group that use research as a tool for conservation and human-wildlife conflict, especially where it involves these Cape leopard. And you'll find these Cape leopard in and around the winelands. If one is lucky, one might see one. That's very unusual, but you'll find evidence of them, spoor and camera trap photos, etc. And there's an amazing guy who used to guide for us in Botswana called Dr. Quinton Martins, who started the study of leopards. And currently I'm busy helping with a research project called the Urban Caracal Initiative. And that's a lady from Austin, Texas, who's researching the African lynx, also known as the caracal. And we're finding these caracals right above the city center and close to the actual city, the urban areas where we live in Cape Town. It's incredible to understand that these animals exist here. And there's an amazing project you can visit which brings to light the carnivore-human conflict. Many of these caracal and leopard kill farmers' sheep and domestic stock in and around Cape Town and on the edges of Cape Town. So how do we manage that conflict? And there's a great project that started using dogs known as Anatolian sheepdogs that are from the Anatolian mountains, from Turkey. And they grow up with the herd of domestic animals and consider their herd their own pack, and they protect that herd. And so there's this project going on where they raise these little pups and then pass them on to farmers, and then ask the farmers to test this project. And if the farmers find the dogs are protecting their herds from the leopard, then the farmers can purchase a dog after having had a dog on their farm for over a year. And it's completely put a stop to all of this terrible trapping, shooting, and poisoning of leopards in and around the Cape area. It's amazing little research projects that are being done. And this project, incidentally, is now being used for cheetah in Namibia and cheetah in other parts of South Africa and leopard in other parts of South Africa. So an incredible project that one can visit and understand. Like I said, we've got hippopotamus right near the city center. There's a place called Siakoi Vlei, and Siakoi in Afrikaans means sea cow. Just like I said, hippopotamus being the words for a seahorse. And that's close to Cape Town. There you can see the backside of Table Mountain in this area where these hippo are to be found. Or how about dassies? Many of you have been in Cape Town will have seen dassies before, these little, they're called rock hyraxes. They look like a small little rodent/rabbit that you find on the rocks. And they're an important food source for caracal and leopard and black eagle. And their closest relative is incidentally the elephant. Would you believe it? Most of you won't believe me, but I promise you it's absolutely true. And I've had some very interesting personal experiences with these dassies. If you go up onto Table Mountain, you'll see plenty of these dassies around. And many times when I've guided groups up there, we've stopped and broken out some lovely sparkling wine, South African champagne, you could call it, to toast the arrival to this tip of Africa. And as soon as you pop the cork, these dussies all rush around you. And I always wondered to myself, why do the dussies always appear as soon as we're popping the cork? And I found out that lots of other people are doing this, and they're pouring out the remnants of their sparkling wine onto the rocks, and the dussies are lapping it up. So we have an incredible population of alcoholic dussies on Table Mountain. Would you believe it? Not only the dussies, how about Cape clawless otter? Cape clawless otter are very important, what's called an umbrella species in Cape Town. They're a bioindicator of water pollution, and we've got plenty in and around both the ocean and the freshwater sources in Cape Town, which indicates we have a very healthy water system in the Cape. Or this one, everybody loves these guys, baboons. There's loads of baboons in and around the Cape, and there's such interesting stories around the human-baboon conflict in the Cape and how we're managing it. I can tell you one of the funniest things I've ever seen was a baboon that went onto a bus with 44 people at Cape Point at the tip of the Cape Peninsula, and I can't tell you how incredible it is to see 44 people exit a bus so quickly once a baboon's gone onto their bus. But interesting stories around how we manage this baboon-human conflict, and you can join these guys called Baboon Matters, and they study and follow these baboons all around the Cape, and can introduce you to the baboon troops, and you can learn all about it. You can learn about it on the Natural Habitats Cape Peninsula tour as part of their extension tour, to see these beautiful baboons and understand their role and their place in the Cape Peninsula. Honey badgers, we've got honey badgers in and around the Cape, and everybody loves honey badgers. They're such an interesting animal. And would you know that honey badgers, their scientific name is actually Mellivora capensis, and that means honey eater of the Cape. So they established their name in the Cape, and they've always been associated with bees. And apart from man, they're the most destructive mammalian predators of honeybees. So in Africa, both for traditional beekeepers as well as your commercial beekeepers, they pose a huge problem because honey badgers just love honey. It's not an essential part of their diet, but it's a sought-after delicacy, and it brings them into conflict with these beekeepers. And there's amazing projects that have been started in the Cape to deal with honey badgers and this type of conflict. They're resilient buggers. I can tell you that if you see honey badgers in the wild, there's pretty much nothing that can tangle or take on a honey badger. Even these lions will be well advised to steer clear of the honey badger. But how do we manage the conflict between honey badgers and beekeepers in the Cape? And if you come to Cape Town, you can buy honey from any of the stores here, and you'll see one of these incredible insignias on the honey, and it says badger friendly. What on earth does that mean? Well, it's interesting because you'll find in other parts of Africa that traditional beekeepers will, they'll hang their honey hives from the bark high up in trees and try and elevate their honey hives to get away from the honey badgers. And in Cape Town, the commercial beekeepers lose probably around $60,000 a year to honey badgers taking their honey. So there's an incredible project that's been started down here with WWF, Endangered Wildlife Trust, and the Wildlife Environmental Group, where they sell for only $8 a piece and save the farmer up to 10 to 15% of his honey stock, and at the same time prevent the farmers from setting traps, poisoning their hives to stop the honey badgers from getting into these hives. So it's an incredible, Cape Town is an incredible city to understand a number of projects that are going on to manage what is human-wildlife conflict, because there's so much incredible wildlife in close proximity to people here. So that's an amazing little story behind what is now known as honey badger, or badger-friendly honey, rather. This might look pretty boring to some of you, but this is an incredible and unique species called the Table Mountain ghost frog, and it's only found on Table Mountain. It only occurs in an area of about 6 square miles on the eastern slopes of Table Mountain. So an incredible little species one can go looking for if you look to hike on Table Mountain. One of the most important parts of Cape Town is its marine biodiversity. Absolutely fantastic marine biodiversity. Imagine a place where the cold Benguela current meets the warm Agulhas current. Can you imagine the kind of marine biodiversity that exists there? I won't even go into detail about the fish, because we could do another hour-long webinar on fish species in Cape Town. But some of the marine biodiversity you can experience is, for example, the pelagic birding. Cape Town is known as one of the world's primary destinations for pelagic birding tours. Pelagic birds are essentially ocean-going birds. So one can leave early in the morning on a boat trip out from the Cape Point, out from the tip of southern Africa, and follow these fishing trawlers out to sea and see an incredible number of pelagic or oceanic birds, whether it's skuas or shearwaters, or my absolute favorite, as you can see in this slide here, the albatross, which is, as many of you know, one of the largest flying birds. But they're really interesting than just being a large flying bird. They are some of the most highly efficient flyers on the planet, and they use two different techniques known as dynamic soaring and slope soaring to cover massive distances in the ocean. And they have some amazing adaptive features that allow them to do this. Have a look at this picture of this albatross. You can see these grooves running from his beak along to his nostrils, these open holes on his beak. Now those are used for one very, very important reason. These tubes allow albatrosses to measure the exact airspeed at which they're flying. It's similar to that analogous tubes on a modern aircraft that measure the airspeed of the aircraft, tell you how fast that aircraft is flying. And the albatross needs to know his exact airspeed measurements in order to perform a process known as dynamic soaring. What is dynamic soaring? Dynamic soaring involves repeatedly rising into the wind and descending downwind. So you're gaining energy from a vertical wind gradient, from a rising up into the wind, turning and descending downwind. And the effort that they expend is mostly in the turns. I mean, this kind of maneuver, once the birds turn from flying upwind, allows them to cover easily over 500 miles a day. And they have massive glide ratios. When we talk about a glide ratio, you can say an albatross's glide ratio is, say, 60:1. Well, what does that mean? It means that for every foot an albatross drops while gliding, it's covering 60 feet in distance. So you can imagine the kind of distance these birds cover, and they have amazing morphological adaptations to allow them to do this. They have something called a shoulder lock. It's a tendon that basically locks their wings into place when they're fully extended, so they don't have to expend energy holding their wings out. And they have an amazing ability, once they're gliding, to actually slow their heart rate down to the same heart rate they have, basal heart rate, when they're resting. So they're actually only expending energy when they're taking off from a fixed point or landing on a fixed point. When they're gliding over the ocean, they're expending close to the same amount of energy as if they were sleeping. It's incredible adaptations of these animals. How about the southern right whales? The Cape and the Cape Peninsula, areas like Cape Town and Hermanus are world famous for whaling. The Cape Town and the Cape area is known as one of the best places in the world to have land-based whaling. And here you're able to see the southern right whales. They're massive whales, about 50 feet in length and up to 50 tons in size. And this is a frightening statistic, I'll tell you, but southern right whales have the largest testicles of any animal on the planet. If that doesn't bring a tear to your eye, I don't know what will. I mean, they're weighing in around 1,000 pounds per whale. So quite a frightening statistic, but an interesting one nonetheless. And what's really interesting about these southern right whales, and many of you all know this already, is southern right whales are completely different to northern right whales. And the two will never be able to interbreed or mix, because these whales can't cross those equatorial waters in the middle of our oceans, the warm waters that cross the middle along the equator. And that's because they have these thick layers of blubber that insulate them and make it impossible for them to dissipate their internal body heat. So they could never cross any tropical waters. So it keeps southern and northern right whales divided. They display amazing behavior down here. Sometimes they raise their flukes in the air like this. It's called sailing, where they actually just float along the top of the surface of the water with their fluke up in the air. And it's not a means of transport. It's not sailing in the verb tense of the word, but it's considered a playful act. The name southern right whales, same as northern right whales, they were the right whales to hunt. They were the easy whales. They were the easy whales to hunt. That's why they were called the right whales. They were slow and cumbersome, and when they were killed, they would float on the surface, so they were easy to manage, and then they could be brought to shore and they'd boil the blubber and use that for oil during the whaling times. But what Cape Town's probably most famous for is its great white sharks. The Cape area is known as the shark capital of the world, and especially of Africa. There's a great place close to Cape Town called Gaan Spy, where one can go and watch incredible shark behavior. And there's over 75,000 Cape fur seals sitting on this rock called Giza Rock. And between Giza Rock and Dyer Island is a place called Shark Alley. And this is where the great white sharks hunt these Cape fur seals, because these poor fur seals, they have to go from the rock out to sea and back on a every 3-day rotation to look for fish to feed. And when they leave the rock, that's when the sharks line up in these deep channels to smash these seals. And because these channels are so deep, they display an incredible type of behavior that was first discovered here in the Cape. This behavior called breaching was first discovered here in the Cape. And it's amazing to see these seals as they leave the island and they make a break for open water. They start doing something called porpoising, as you can see here, where they're basically jumping in and out of the water at high speed to avoid creating a silhouette, to creating high speed. And what comes from below, what lurks in the depths of these channels around this Giza Rock are these great white sharks. And if one is lucky, one can see incredible shark behavior like this as the great white sharks are breaching and smashing these poor Cape fur seals as they make a break for it out to sea, and as well as when they are returning. It's not only the great white sharks that are of interest. There's very interesting other sharks. You can do incredible diving in a place called Simonstown, where you can dive with something called a 7-gill cow shark. Now these sharks are very rare and very hard to find, and you'll never be able to dive with them anywhere else in the world because they mainly occur within what's known as the benthic zone. And the benthic zone is it's an ecological region that's the lowest level in a body of water, so often very deep, in other words. But the benthic zone in Cape Town, in False Bay, is very shallow. So these sharks are occurring in a benthic zone of anything between 15 to 20 meters. So we're talking, roughly 60 feet of water. So you can easily dive in that and see these incredible sharks. The latest incredible species to make its arrival on the scene in Cape Town are these guys. This is the orcas, or killer whales. Now, most of you will know orcas. Some of you will know orcas from the beautiful areas, the northwest of North America, those areas, Bering Straits, Vancouver Island of Canada, where these orcas are quite common and hunt various different types of species. And we all know orcas belong to that oceanic dolphin family. And these pods of orcas are transient pods. They're coming through the Cape. They're not here permanently, but they're coming through the Cape, and they've learned an incredible type of behavior that's being studied at the moment. And that is hunting massive pods of dolphin, of common dolphin. And these pods of common dolphin move into this big bay called False Bay. And they move into this bay because fish congregate in this bay where warm and cold water meet. And following these pods of dolphin are the killer whales. And the killer whales, or orcas, learned pretty quickly that there's some deep reef systems in this bay. And they can force the common dolphins between these reef systems. And then it's just absolute carnage. So there's incredible behavior that's being studied now close to Cape Town with these orcas hunting these common dolphins. So guys, that was a short and interesting look at charismatic Cape Town from a true fauna and flora perspective. I hope I've given you a real good understanding of the history of Cape Town that's brought forward the incredible biodiversity that occurs here, and it's all deeply connected to this incredible floral system known as the Cape Floral System, or FANBOS. So next time you're coming to Cape Town, if you're joining Natural Habitat on the extension program, do consider the amazing biodiversity that you can experience in Cape Town, besides all the wonderful restaurants, activities, and winelands that are, of course, on offer here.
Well, Craig, thank you. That was a great presentation, and I would encourage our audience members to send in any questions that you might have for Craig, and we will get those answered as best we can. So, a question for you: how many days do you recommend that a person spend in Cape Town to really take in everything?
Great question. And Cape Town as a city is probably one of the most varied, interesting, and diverse cities in the world, hence its reputation as a go-to destination. I would suggest one should always consider at least 3 days. 3 nights, 4 days is pretty optimum. Most people can't consider a longer time in Cape Town because there's so much else that one wants to see. Go on safari, maybe go up to Namibia or Botswana or other regions. So an optimum time period would be a 3-night, 4-day stay in Cape Town. but many people who travel to Southern Africa as first timers will do that, and then they'll sometimes come back to Cape Town and spend their entire 2-week holiday just in the Cape, and taking in all the wine farms and the great dining and the Cape Peninsula, and heading up into the mountains and hiking and all of those different activities you can do.
Perfect, thank you. And let's see, what else have we got here? Okay, is there a particular time of year for what's best for the various groups of wildlife, like when is the bird nesting season or the whale season? Are there particular times of year that you would want to be in Cape Town?
Absolutely, great question. Okay, so Cape Town has a Mediterranean climate. So during our winter, we have quite a bit of rainfall, and during our summer, it's very dry and very warm, but yet mild. There's no humidity. It's not excruciating heat. So to give you an idea, our summer stretches from, let's say, November through to March, give or take a month here or there, or a week here or there. And the ambient daytime temperature will be around 85 Fahrenheit, between 80 and 85 Fahrenheit. The winter can drop to between 70 and 75 Fahrenheit, down to 70 Fahrenheit. So think about that first of all, climate, how that affects your experience. Then to answer your question on detail in terms of species, there are specific seasons when it's better. Generally, when it results in great white sharks, one would actually want to be seeing great white sharks during our summer period, because the sharks head out further offshore and will then be hunting further offshore where the seals are moving. So that's a good time to see great white sharks. The southern right whales only start arriving in the Cape in late July, maybe middle of August, and then they have their babies. They start what's known as calving, and then they calve all the way from August through to mid-October, maybe early November, and then they leave. So whaling, you're talking about August through to end October for the whales. Then when it involves other land species, if it's baboons or caracal or honey badgers, etc., well, that can be year-round. There's no good or bad time if one comes out to see them. One's lucky if one sees those type of species.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, this has been a fantastic. Oh, let's see. Whoops. Follow-up question. Bird nesting. When is the best time for birding?
Okay, absolutely. So your best time for birding will generally be quite late in the springtime. So our springtime obviously is the opposite of your fall or autumn time. So during your autumn time is our springtime, and late in the springtime would be the best time to be in the Cape to see the nesting birding.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, well, I think that covers it. Looks like we've answered all of the questions, and several people were wondering about the replay, so we'll be getting that out within the next day. So, Craig, let me just turn it back over to you now for any closing comments you might have.
Thank you very much. Just thank you very much, guys, for joining the webinar. Do go and have a look at Natural Habitat's Cape Town extension. They cover some incredible areas and areas that we've talked about, and they obviously cover incredible areas that one would want to see and experience. But do also consider the scratching the surface of Cape Town. These kind of biodiverse experiences that exist in Cape Town that one can add to one's travels.
And we thank you all for being with us today, and thank you to Craig, who is up late to be able to deliver this presentation to us. We really appreciate your time this evening, Craig. And with that, we will say good day and conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everybody.